This episode of the Renewable Energy Smart Pod is brought to you by KPMG. Despite growth in renewables, overall emissions are up. What does this mean for businesses and the race to net zero? At KPMG, the team has deep experience in the energy industry across each discipline necessary to help your business prepare for the future. Visit the KPMG website or click on the link in today's show notes to learn more. What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Renewable Energy Smart Pod. I'm your host, Sean McMahon, and today we're going to be talking about sustainable fuels, specifically sustainable aviation fuel. In a minute, I'll be joined by Patrick Gruber, the Chief Executive Officer of Gevo. Patrick and the team at Gevo are at the forefront of the sustainable fuel sector. So we're going to discuss the basics of those fuels, how they fit into a wider energy ecosystem, what it will take for those fuels to see wider adoption, and the hurdles that might be standing in the way. Patrick is a no-nonsense type of guy who is passionate about growing the sustainable fuels sector in an effort to fight climate change. I think you'll appreciate the energy he brings to this episode. Looking ahead, on our next episode, we will hear from Nick Waithe, the Chief Executive of the Energy Institute. Each year, the Energy Institute publishes the Statistical Review of World Energy, which offers a comprehensive look at energy production and consumption around the world. Nick will pop by to share what the most recent review found, both from a broad look at the energy sector and in areas specific to renewables and precious minerals. That should be a great conversation, but right now, let's get things started with Patrick Gruber from Gevo. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My guest is Patrick Gruber, the CEO of Gevo. Patrick, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to bring you on. We're going to be talking a lot about renewable fuels, specifically sustainable aviation fuel, and your company is, up to your eyeballs in that. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about Gevo and what you and the team do?
Sure. So Gevo is a company where we're very focused on using carbohydrates as a raw material. We make them into alcohols. Alcohol, that's by brewing, actually. And then you take that alcohol and you convert it into these basic building block chemicals that you would normally get out of a cracker if you're doing a petroleum game. We're getting them from the alcohols. That would be like ethylene. And then you take that ethylene and do it just like the petrochemical industry would, connect those things together to get the jet fuel. So it's a combination of biology plus chemistry, roping in agriculture, and then doing all of that processing with renewable energy. So this means that we're wind farms important to us, renewable natural gas is important to us, hydrogen is important to us too, because we need a little bit of hydrogen. And all of that, you can get to net zero, even carbon negative footprints, which is pretty darn fascinating about what we're doing here, right? Carbon negative, think about that. After it's burned as a fuel, it's still carbon negative. And that's because we also play in the game of sequestration.
Okay, so as most folks in the renewables industry have learned in the last few years, supply chain is something you really got to kind of be concerned about. And obviously for you, that probably kind of lends itself more to feedstocks. So what does the feedstocks look for your company and all the products you're producing?
Yeah, well, you know what? It's fascinating. Whenever someone starts talking about the scale and scope of fossil-based fuels, they get overwhelmed. It's so big. How can we solve these problems and blah, blah, blah. What we have noticed is that there's not really a whole lot of robust analysis done around what's possible to do in the future, because people assume that, for instance, that agriculture is stagnant and hasn't changed, and that we're maxed out and it's fully optimized. Well, that's not even close to being the truth, not even at all. And so we have a basic premise that photosynthesis is a much better way of capturing renewable energy, because you get both the electrons and the carbon and the hydrogen, all three things, I guess, and you can make them into a fuel versus doing all these other things like direct air capture and all these other things. So if I want a liquid fuel in the end, and in SAF, jet fuel we do, because that stuff's so energy dense and all the infrastructure is there, man, that stuff works great. And I can see that in gasoline. We're going to have places where you want gasoline that's hydrocarbon based, because not everywhere lends itself to being hydrogen or electric. And the same thing's true with on the road diesel fuel. So we can make all those things, right? But people go, oh, it can't be done. There's not enough land and it'll impact food. That's BS. I'm telling you right now, that's BS. That's not actually real. That's based on ancient data, not paying attention to the facts on the ground of what's really happening. So what's interesting about this is that when you think about what has to be done and how do you solve this problem, you got to do a couple things. One, you want really, really low carbon footprint or carbon negative fuels. Why? Think of it like a detergent concentrate. If I just did grid electricity, for example, I wasn't paying attention, I might have a CI score of 50. A CI score is the measurement from the emissions of carbon index, it's called. It's related to greenhouse gases. Ideally, you want to be a 0 or below. And everyone says we're going to be net zero by 2030. Well, the game here then is, how do I get that done? If you drive that CI score down further and further, you need less renewable gallons than I would if it was a CI score of 50. It's like a detergent concentrate. And so that matters. And we have the ability to do those things. Well, how? How do you do it? Well, you leverage existing systems. So you think of the scale. Well, guess what? I'm leveraging agricultural systems that already exist. I'm interested in using cornstarch. You take the corn, grind it up, separate the starch from the protein and the oil. The protein and the oil go to the animal feed or food markets, and the carbohydrates, which normally go to high fructose corn syrup and corn sweeteners. Here's one for you that people don't normally know. Sweet corn, popcorn, corn on the cob, corn in a can, corn in a bag represent 1% of all the corn grown. That's it. And those are grown for food. We're not using that kind of corn at all. We're growing the kind that is done for making protein for animals and for get the oil out of it too. And so it's just a different thing, and people aren't aware of that. So anyway, the point of this is leveraging large scale infrastructure already. It already exists, and it's leveraging it. And we're using the alcohol we use, ethanol. Everybody knows about ethanol. The ethanol industry has done a good job of learning how to run their plants. But if we take ethanol, we can convert that. We have the technologies nailed to convert that into petrochemical products like jet fuel. Well, you think about that, and if we just suppose I could snap my fingers and say, let's take all the ethanol today that's produced for the fuel market for gasoline, blend stock, and people don't like that very much. But okay, we're going to make it into jet fuel. I could take that 17 billion gallons and turn that into roughly 10 billion gallons of jet fuel. 10 billion gallons of jet fuel at a 50% blend, which is allowed under the blending rules. Guess what? That would meet the full demand of jet fuel in the US, just like that. And so we talk about scale and supply chain, they already exist in this. So we don't see that as a problem. Plus, when you consider then that we see US yields of corn at 160 bushels per acre, whatever, 170 bushels per acre, and we see the maximum at 400 or 500, I think there's room for improvement. And when you look at internationally, corn yields are in the below 100. So this this is all without expanding land use. That gets me to another fallacy. People say, well, you're going to use more land. Oh, BS. That's not true. That's ridiculous. You think you could get away doing that, plowing down some virgin prairie these days, and someone's not going to be there with a cell phone watching? You really think that's reality? Or they're going to watch with a satellite, because that's actually what we do. We watch with satellites. So it is not the world of old. We can also use cellulosic feedstocks. Gevo could, in terms of stuff that comes from wood. Do you think we're going to have somebody clear cut a forest? Really? No, I don't think so. I think we're going to be doing pretty careful harvesting of the wood to make sure we don't hurt the environment. This is part and parcel to the turf that we live in. We get held to a much, much, much higher standard than, say, those petrochemical guys who can just go ahead and pollute all they want. So we have to prove everything absolutely across the board with the whole supply chain. And so another part of our business is to do exactly that. We call it Verity Tracking, Verity Carbon Solutions. And this is about tracking every bit of sustainability data, carbon data, reporting it openly, transparently, and documenting the hell out of it so we can withstand all scrutiny. That's also part of it. And then that gives everyone in the supply chain the ammo and confidence to go, yeah, bring it. We got the data. You don't.
All righty. Well, I got to say, Pat, I appreciate the energy you're bringing to this conversation about energy. So talk a little bit more about the markets and the industries you're serving. Obviously, we've talked about, airlines and things like that, but what else?
Yeah, here's the thing that's changed a bit, and I still need to see how it unfolds, is that I think from in the marketplace, people can generally agree that, yeah, those airplanes unlikely to jump to hydrogen anytime soon because, heck, hydrogen has a quarter of the density, and okay, with the energy efficiency, maybe you need big tanks of liquid hydrogen on board an airplane, way bigger than a gas tank full of jet fuel. And so that means you got some kind of a new plane that can do this, and it's really, no one quite knows the answer to that. So maybe someday in the future, and then you need all infrastructure. Oh, and did I mention that liquid hydrogen? Yeah, okay, someday. And are they going to be electric anytime soon? Well, we can't even figure out how to do batteries for long haul, let alone airplanes. So will there be opportunity? Sure, there will be. It's not this panacea. The key here, so things like jet fuel, we can all agree, probably hydrocarbons are going to be here for a long, long, long time. And the airline industry believes that as well. So that looks like a good market. The question is, at what price is that carbon? This is the critical issue for us, all of us in the space. And this is true of gasoline or diesel fuel or hydrogen even, is what's that value of the carbon abatement? Who's going to pay for it? How's it going to get paid for? Because a product like ours, and this is super important now, the cash cost, meaning full variable, raw material plus variable cost plus fixed cost, full cash out the door to make my gallon of fuel, actually is competitive with petrochemical stuff in the 80 to $100 range. Amazing, I think. I think that should be people going, what? And this is that, and you have a zero carbon footprint besides? Well, yeah, that's what we're doing here. That's what's possible. And that's not even fully optimized yet. But that's what it pencils out to be today. The killer for us, the challenge, I got to build new plants. So I have several dollars a gallon of new capital to pay for, where I'm competing with a depreciated industry. Okay. So I'm like, where's that value going to come from? Someone's got to step up. And that really translates to then the carbon value. Who will pay for this? Well, with the IRA bill, there's supposed to be some money in there. I'm waiting to see the results of that analysis and what models they use. The CORSIA thing was jacked. I'm just telling you right now, the way that they did it, how they did it. Did you know U.S. agriculture wasn't even consulted about this, and they just made up these rules? Are you freaking kidding me? It's like, it was such done in a black box, and people, it's like, you got to be kidding me.
So real quick, explain listeners to the CORSIA. What are we talking about here?
That CORSIA is this thing where it's a framework. So it's not, so what, okay, there's a couple things. One, there's a IATA, the International Airline Transportation Association, along with the United Nations, all got together and said, well, we really should do this right. We're not going to do it like on-road fuels. We're going to come up with all the rules of sustainability, blah, blah, blah. Let's make up our own rules. And so they started up this group. It's done, sponsored by IATA. It's called CORSIA. I don't remember what CORSIA stands for. And then it is around the framework of sustainability, what it looks like in the future, and principles and stuff like that. And as part of it, they said, well, you got to count carbon along the way. So the reason it's important is that in the IRA bill, there's a section called 45, and there's a 45B and a 45Z. And 45 deals with transportation fuels, on-road transportation fuels, and it specifies that Argonne GREET model would be used to measure carbon. And then on the SAF thing, it did something really weird. This is weird. It said we're going to use CORSIA or another method, similar method. The problem is CORSIA is not actually a method of counting carbon. So we're like, what does that mean? And we'd like to know that answer, because we can't figure out economics without knowing what that answer is, right? So what's happening then is we're told that GREET model is going to be the method for counting for SAF as well. There's been a big wrestling match amongst all the agencies and stakeholders and the White House. So the GREET model is a model that has been developed for years and years and years by Argonne National Laboratory. It is the gold standard for how you count carbon and the methodologies by which you do so. It also has with it these various modules that get added and updated on a regular basis as the information and publications become more clear and the stuff gets updated. Everybody who's serious about carbon accounting uses the GREET model in some way, fashion, or form. What happens, though, is that people will say, well, I'll use the GREET model, and they'll take a portion of the GREET model, not the whole GREET model, and they'll say, well, I'll use the GREET model. Then they'll stuff their own data into it rather than using like real data. And so that's the part where it's really troublesome and where the arguments fight, because people, especially around soil carbon or sequestration or some of these other, like there's some other things too, but that's where they fight over it. But the reality is the data is the damn data. This is how about we measure it. So we're huge fans of, we're out measuring stuff on the field. I had one of the administration people say, well, it's not possible to measure carbon in the field. I don't even know what to tell you, because we do it. It takes work, money. We do it. Sure we can. I don't understand. So we've got all these paradigms to blow up. The world's changed, and you got to acknowledge that and then step up to it too. Because I'm talking about one heck of a lot of data collection across the whole and reporting it. Because in the end, you know who's going to pay for this fuel? And this is back to the issue at hand. It's going to be you and me as consumers, and sitting in that plane paying for it one way or another, directly, because I believe that there's a value associated with this that I can be convinced of, or it's going to be because we're taxed, right? Or combinations thereof, which is probably the likely thing. But that gets back to the issue. What's carbon worth? Where? Why? Who's going to pay for it and for how long? Because in the end, we got to know that answer in order to build these plants. Every company in my space, everybody has this very same issue. What's it worth?
And now, a quick message from the exclusive sponsor of today's episode, KPMG. Energy demand is growing, and while significant progress has been made in developing renewables, fossil fuels remain the dominant sources of energy globally. What does this mean for the future of energy? The experts at KPMG understand the new realities of today's energy industry and can help your business prepare for the future. Visit the KPMG website or click on the link in today's show notes to learn more. And so now getting back to that conversation about, sitting on the plane, it sounds like earlier you're kind of trying to get to the point where the infrastructure for these fuels doesn't have to be completely shifted. And like you said, the paradigm shifted to account for like a hydrogen fuel and a bigger tank. So a lot of times when we're talking about sustainable aviation fuel, people don't quite understand what we're talking about. Are we talking about a blend? Are we talking about 100% replacement, a 10% blend? Like, I've talked to different experts who have different solutions who have a different percentage of blend. So what does Gevo offer?
All right. So here's how to think about it is jet fuel is kerosene. Jet A is kerosene. Okay. So, and kerosene is a mixture of molecules. It's a spread made from petroleum. We could make 100%, 50%, 10%, whatever someone wants, we can do. So technically not even a challenge. So that technology exists. It's copied straight from the petrochemical industry, make whatever. And these are exact drop-ins. These are drop-ins. This is incredibly important. In fact, there's such a drop-in that once you take something that we make and blend it with Petrojet, you cannot tell the difference unless you measure the C14, C13 ratios. You can't tell the difference physically by any measurement. It's the same. Legally, it's the same. So once it's blended, it is Jet A. End of discussion. End of story. It took us 6 years to get that approved. We're the ones who did it for alcohol to jet of all types. And it was brutal. We flew on every freaking plane and platform and engine and, supply chain and tank and pump everywhere. Got her done. And so it's the same. And this is incredibly important. If we want something to change in our lifetimes, we got to leverage all the existing stuff and make it better because it takes decades and billions of trillions of dollars to change infrastructure. That's not realistic.
Okay, real quick, you mentioned ATJ. What is that?
That's an acronym for alcohol to jet. It's a generic term for taking an alcohol and doing the chemistry to convert it into jet fuel. And so you take like an ethanol, or we can do butanol too, but you do chemistry on those alcohols and then make them into jet fuel. But what's cool about that is you can take the technique to actually do that conversion is stuff that's copied directly out of the petrochemical industry that's already well proven and well optimized. So we can just do that. We're doing our own flavor of it to try and make it so it's reduced carbon footprint by certain integrations and how we manage energy. But so it's got our own spin on it because we're trying to lower the carbon footprint overall, even more than they would care about. But it works already. These techniques are known.
So what does the current landscape look like, though? I know you've got some existing partnerships in place. You signed a recent agreement with the USDA. When it comes to these sustainable aviation fuels, how close are we to making that more immediate change? Like you said, it takes years and billions and trillions of dollars to change infrastructure. This seems like more of a, not flipping a light switch, but something that's a lot faster.
You got to build new capacity. So it takes 2 years to build a plant. Once you have the design done, once the site located, it takes 2 years. It takes like a plant like ours is the hard cost, meaning the equipment itself and installation for our net zero one plant's $850 million. It'll creep up a bit, I'm sure. And then we're working on beating it back because all the inflation stuff installed, it's like 1.3 or something billion on a fully financed, fully installed cost. So you're talking big money here. All right, for 65 million gallons of hydrocarbons. Yowza.
That's what I was going to say. How much can one plant produce?
65 million gallons on that scale. So that takes 100 million gallons of ethanol equivalents in. So now it can work. It can work. But it's who's going to finance it? And the question around financing is around what's that carbon value? People get the cash cost and go, yep, we believe you on cash costs. They look in the future and go, hey, will people value carbon in the future? And a lot of people on Wall Street say, yep, carbon value is going to increase. We believe that we have the lowest cost of carbon abatement for fuels that there is. And we have a lot of data that shows that because of how efficient the system is and all the rest. And that's huge. But what it comes in a real practical sense is, hey, 10 years from now, what's that value of carbon? Anybody know? And I don't think they do because we even know fully what the carbon value is today because you know what? We don't have clarity about that IRA bill. So you know what that means for us? Pencils down on Wall Street. Other than keep us informed of what's changing. But until I know what are all the values of carbon, I can't add them up or even finish having the discussions with airlines and their customers. So, because we got the federal stuff, we got state stuff that can add up into it. Maybe there's other incentives along the way. Like I like RFS. RFS seems stable, comparatively to these people. And so that's what has to happen. I need to know what the numbers are. I can't even finance something. And this is the status of where we're at. We're all in limbo land until we see some clarity here. And then we can start solving the problems again. So I think we'll get clarity in December. Then we'll start solving the problems. But it's all about financing. Bottom line, drop in products, drop in infrastructure. This is 100% about financings. That's what this is about. Financings then have to be pegged to the price in the marketplace. People understand there should be a premium for low carbon or zero carbon. They get it. But how much? And they don't want to be an outlier. So we need to get on with this and build stuff. Well, how are we going to build it? Well, I got to have financing. I got to know what carbon value is, or at least have predictions that people believe in. And I'll tell you what's happened in the last year around feds, where no one believes anything, is not helpful. It is not helpful.
You're talking about just the uncertainty either with what's coming from the IRA or,
Yep.
political infighting.
So 3 years ago, everyone's like, oh, the Green New Deal, it's going to be great. And everyone's all rosy and robust and let's go crazy. Now people are going, they can't even get their act together on how to count carbon, which isn't that hard to do, actually. It's and the government's been doing it with Argonne National Laboratory for years. And it is the gold standard. The world experts. And oh, no, we're not going to use them. We're going to create something new. Really? Are you crazy? So now they're all getting their act together. So they did a good job. So the administration has done a good job, I think, pulling people together. So that's the truth. I've talked to all those people. I really have. And they're working it. And they know this is like, they got to have some, all of us have the same interest. We want a policy that can last through administrations because there are going to be changes. Everyone believes there's going to be changes in the future.
Yeah, of course. Speaking of those changes, though, what do you see as the political landscape for something like this? Because you got a plan in Iowa, if I'm not mistaken, right?
An RNG plant in Iowa, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at the generalizations of, the political parties here in the U.S., how does that change?
Well, what's interesting? I think there's a shift going on. Years ago, all I had to do was say the word greenhouse gas, I get thrown out of a red office, years ago.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. It seems like there's a lot more, we'll go red and blue for however we want to name it, but red districts and red representatives in government who are starting to see either A, the money part of it, or B, the jobs part of it, or all of the above. So how have those conversations changed? It sounds like you're saying you used to get kicked out of the offices and now they're taking those meetings.
Not anymore. And I think now that people have been understanding that it is a fact that when you burn a fossil carbon, absolute certainty, it wouldn't have been burned, but for us as human beings. And in fact, it goes in the atmosphere. And if you believe any kind of fundamental theory about anything regarding ecology, you know that we as human beings interact with our environment. So hell yeah, there's climate change. Shut up. It's just a question of how much the climate change, what's the consequence, who's responsible, and all the rest. So it's not so simple as I'm not one of these guys who believes we're going to die in 12 years or anything like that, or the world's going to end. But the fact is, I don't really know. I don't know. It is the truth. And I don't think anyone truly knows. But that's part of the issue is that we definitely are going to places in carbon emissions in the atmosphere. They're definitely the theory of greenhouse gas causing heat. That's real. I mean, that's something you can prove. It's real. So what does it mean? When does it mean it? What do we do about it? And how do you get the rest of the world to behave and all the rest? Those are all legit questions. And I think what happens is that too often people get so polarized, they just speak about it as like religious doctrine versus just like, can we solve the problems really? We can make a difference and we can make money at it, for God's sakes. This is my point about talking about cash cost. We could be competitive with petroleum. If I had the same benefit that those guys did, where they got sponsored by the government years ago, if I had that same deal, I could already be competitive, and except for I could offer to the consumers a product that's low carbon. You think if I could document it, you think they choose mine or theirs? Well, I think that's the point. And so we're at this inflection point where I think where the technologies have advanced enough. This point about counting the carbon accurately and reporting it transparently and standing by it and let it be audited by others or anyone else who wants to throw rocks, hugely, hugely important. The world has not been that way before. I'm talking about laying it all open, all my production energy in the open for people. You think petrochemical companies want to do that? I don't think so. So this is a different paradigm about what we're trying to sell, because in the end, it's got to be getting consumers, taxpayers to believe that they're getting something for the money. Now, interestingly enough, when I'm talking about here's what has to be done, we should measure at the field level. Field level. Don't give an average number for corn or say all corn is good. Not all corn is good. Some of the guys, I'm sorry, but I don't think they should be farming. It's like, oh my God. I look at their emissions and I'm like, oh, please stop. Go do something else. You need a new job. Let's help you. And then you got other guys who are like so superb. I'm like, you guys should be teachers to other people. Let's go. And how do we get other people doing, and let's spread it around the world, because by doing these modern agriculture techniques like strip till and no till or cover crops, some of these things are you solve other problems like nitrogen. You reduce the nitrogen, you reduce the water runoff, you create another crop. There's all kinds of things that come with it, and we're at the very beginning. So all of this is going to be driven economically. So we believe that if farmers do a good job growing their stuff with sustainable agriculture or climate smart ag practice, we should pay them more. So we're out committed already to do that. We're going to pay them more. If I can document, get your data, I'm going to pay you more because I want that corn from that field, and the corn that sucks, I don't want that corn.
What's the premium you're paying farmers who are doing it right?
It'd be like, I think about 40 cents a bushel, in that range, that we can identify today and be willing to do. That's like real money for someone who's doing 1,000 bushels per acre or whatever.
So what does the marketplace look like in terms of other participants you're working with? Partnerships with airlines, you mentioned at IATA. What other players are in this helping companies like Gevo advance this whole thing, whether it's testing it in their products, doing their own research and R&D and on finding new uses for fuels like this? Who are some of the other major players?
Well, the testing phase are done. We're done. All that kind of stuff's all done. This is all about commercialization. That's all done already. So this is not an R&D phase project. So people will try to tell you, you'll meet people who say it is. They're trying to make their own special technology, special sauce. But I'm telling you, these techniques that we're using are tried and true, proven stuff from the petrochemical industry that's been done already, right? Because look, ethylene, the 2-carbon building block, ethylene, it's the same ethylene chemically, whether it's made from petroleum or renewables. With the only difference would be the source of the carbon and hydrogen, so and electrons. But it's the same. Everything's the same. So this is one of these things that we face all the time of confusing people about where the status is. We can make any damn thing we want. Just someone got to pay me. I had someone, for example, say to me, I was doing a panel recently in Texas, and the person said, oh, but there's these technologies, there's going to be a shortage of raw materials, and we'll have to allocate. So on-road fuels will get shorted for diesel fuel if people divert what can be done for diesel fuel into SAF. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'll make you diesel fuel. I can make you diesel fuel. All you got to do is give me a contract that lasts long term, that's financeable. I'll make you diesel fuel. You want to sign up for that? Well, then I'd have to lock in a long-term price. Yeah, no kidding. That's the point. You got to lock in a long-term price. And that's the issue. Comes down to the issue. So airlines are our partners. Delta has been terrific. One World Group has been terrific. So Sky Team, Delta. Delta has had a whole bunch of their customers up to our plant in Minnesota, and then we take them out to farms and show them how modern farms actually work. Every one of them is blown away and shocked because it's different than what all these sustainability experts are talking about. A lot of the people who come there are sustainability experts, but they've never been to a farm before. They've only read about it in books. And so then they're shocked by what reality is. And of course, this is the problem we face, is people don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're willing to learn though, and we got to educate them. But it all comes down to the end to, let's get the real data. Let's measure things. Let's report things. We can do that. We have the tools to do that. Let's do it then. And that's why we're getting traction on stuff, is because we're willing to share all that with people and teach them. And in the end, we got to teach the people downstream, the customers downstream, consumers downstream. We got education to work all the time with policy people around the world. I got a team in Europe this week. We're making progress there too, because what they did is this paradigms that agriculture always pollutes and cows are bad. No, they're not. That's not true. Can we sort out the truth from the fiction and stop with the narratives and just get the facts? Because this is a technical problem. The solutions exist already. This is our constant crusade. And yeah, we're passionate because we know it can be done. We know it can be economical, right? So we can see it and taste it. Financing it. Okay, in this hyperinflation world and uncertainty with wars, this is not helpful whatsoever, I got to tell you. But we'll work through it.
Okay, and you talked earlier about climate change, and we've also been talking extensively about feedstocks and acres of corn and things like that. Do you have any concerns about the impact climate change will have on crop yields, which is something you'd obviously be counting on? So it's hard to pencil that out for decades and decades out, but where does that fit in?
You know what? When I was a kid, I don't recall corn growing very well in North Dakota. Now it does. So
I got you. So where it might suffer, there's other places that might have opportunity.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I'm like, we can grow more stuff. Plants like more CO2. Maybe we should grow more plants. And maybe we should do it systematically so we make sure we don't do the pollution that comes with unrestricted agriculture, or not unrestricted, wrong word, but disciplined. So let's do sustainable agriculture and let's grow more stuff and capture more of the CO2 in the atmosphere of plant matter. So there's all kinds of things we can do. So we can sequester carbon in the soil. We can take CO2 emissions and put them in ground and make rock out of them. That's also possible. So all these are the tools.
Okay. And then you talked about, we're trying to educate consumers, even folks within the commercial industries. And one thing you said earlier, I think is going to be an attention getter. You said that through your processes, your fuel can end up actually being carbon negative.
Carbon negative.
So just real quick, you make a claim like that in the renewables industry, you're gonna get some attention and maybe get some skeptics. So let's take a few minutes right now and just walk me through what you mean by that and how that process works where you get to that outcome.
Sure. So there's two things you have to consider when you're designing a fuel. You're going to take about the carbon from which it's made and then the energy by which you make it, right? We're using photosynthetic energy to connect carbons together and add hydrogen to the carbon. Taking CO2, adding water to it, you release, photosynthesis gives off oxygen. And so that's what happens chemically. It's actually what's called in chemistry a reduction. And then we're taking that carbohydrate and then rearranging it through fermentation, again, using the energy, biological energy, to drive even more reduction. And then we're finishing it off by doing chemistry to make it into a jet fuel. And we add one molecule of hydrogen to it, so to the finished fuel. Okay, that's technically what we're doing. Now, I need process energy, electricity, and heat in order to drive my process. So if I take that footprint out, if I eliminate that footprint with renewable energy, then I don't have a footprint from using energy in my process. Okay, that's how it's eliminated. Now, to get to negative, what's it take? By sustainable agricultural practices, by growing corn, we've measured the fields. We got some are like minus 30 footprint coming in to our plant from that corn because of how good they do the low-till, cover crop, precision agriculture, which is probably the biggest thing of all. Precision agriculture, meaning you add only those chemicals that are needed exactly on that spot that needs it, kind of a thing. And that's the way the technology is changing. It actually builds up soil carbon. We can measure it. And so that's negative. So that's cool. I like it. And we've seen data lead to minus 100 jet fuel by doing what's called, you change the microbiome in the soil. So I don't know if you've ever, people sometimes are aware of like the microbiome in your gut. You got to pay attention to it, make it all healthy, happy. Soil's kind of the same thing. And so there's people developing these techniques where it's soil bacteria, you change them and you can bring them back, make them enriched, but you can actually capture more carbon in the soil and reduces nitrogen emissions and all the rest. So that's part of what can happen. But today we can just take those techniques of what's being done with precision ag, strip tilling, good management. It's minus 30 in some cases, right? That's part of it. Then you have, during a fermentation, you make CO2. Everyone has been, I don't know, a lot of us have tried beer at home, it makes bubbles. Those bubbles are full of CO2. So if we take that CO2 that comes off the fermentation, you take it and put it in the ground, that's worth 30 CI points right there. So that's how you get to carbon negative. So by eliminating your energy footprint by using renewable energy and renewable hydrogen, plus then paying attention to sequestration of the soil, sequestration of the CO2 that comes off the fermentation, you can get to carbon negative. That's how you do it. And it's quite impressive as to what can be done. This has been published by Argonne National Laboratory. So that's their data. It's our data. We gave it to them. And they said, you tell us what you think. And they just published it. So we're solid on this claim.
I appreciate that explaining. Not only for me, quite frankly, I'm not the scientist here, but I know there's a lot of listeners who appreciate kind of that succinct explanation. You talked about your work with One World and Delta earlier. Do you have any bold predictions in terms of the market for sustainable aviation fuel in, say, 10 years? What percentage of fuels in all these jets crisscrossing the globe? What do you think is going to be sustainable aviation fuel? Or if you want to take it longer, 20, just give me a percentage of fuel and how many years out?
All right. So I'll tell you how I think of it, because I think of it a little bit differently. My company's doing renewable hydrocarbons broadly. I know how to make diesel fuel, jet fuel. We have other technology that makes gasoline. And I'm looking at the problems and I'm looking at all of them, right? And we can make a dent on all of them. It's possible. I think what we're going to see, this initial phase of years is going to be around setting up the infrastructure, proving it all works, and there's money to be made, and it's a worthy investment so we can get carbon copies done. And we're setting up, by the way, our plant design so we can do carbon copies. We'll do modularization for that. How much could be done in 10-year period? That depends upon the financing and availability in the marketplaces, and it depends upon future value of carbon and how people perceive it. So what's going to happen in 10 years, you're going to see is that we're going to see photosynthetic routes by far dominate. It's going to be made of HEFA, the technology that comes from vegetable oil, and from stuff like us, which comes from carbohydrates through alcohols. That's going to be the dominant SAF. And the question of how big it is, should we be 1 billion gallons in 10 years? Boy, I sure as heck would hope so. Many billions of gallons in 10 years. By 2030, we should be approaching that already of people in our network or around us or our licensees. All predicated on we've got to crack the financial nut of the long-term view of what is carbon value worth and get kind of a consensus built in the financial community.
How many billion gallons of jet fuel is used right now? So like when you say 1 billion or multiple billions in 10 years?
Worldwide, about 110 billion, and it's going to grow to 130 billion in the next 10 or 15 years. And in the US, it's about 20 billion gallons are used. And the thing is, that's a nut we can crack. Those are totally in the realm of fair game. Here's one of the things that's I didn't mention, but I should have, is that I think EVs are going to be successful in certain places, and they're going to take a bite out of the gasoline pool. The gasoline pool is going to get smaller. You know what that means? It means ethanol becomes more available for other uses because you don't need it for gasoline. Well, fine. I can turn that into jet fuel, and everybody's happy. It makes money. So, and it all works. So I think that's over time. If you play that out to a 10-year period, then it's even more severe. That people are talking about 30 or 40% gasoline pool shrink. Cool. That makes more feedstock available for me to turn it into jet fuel. So it'll be a shift. So we aren't going to be feedstock limited like that. It's all about the financings, carbon value, and clarity, and stability. That's what's needed.
Okay. Well, on that note, I appreciate you kind of helping us sort through it, Pat. So thank you very much for your time. This has been very educational for me, and I think for our listeners as well.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's our show for today. But before we get out of here, I want to say one final thank you to the sponsor of today's episode, KPMG. Thank you all for listening. And if you haven't already, please subscribe or follow this show on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And as always, please be sure to share it with your friends and colleagues. Have a great day.